Good morning, Sunny Hills. For our Friday devotional today, I want to continue our conversation about the Sermon on the Mount, specifically the Beatitudes. And we've been looking at the Beatitudes as more than just proverbial one-liners of truth, but more like an ongoing flow from beginning a relationship with God to sort of a maturity in a relationship with God. And so the Beatitudes open up with, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And the last one is, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And so they form sort of a bookends, I think, to describe the initial way that we approach God, recognizing we have no life without Him, and then the progression to the point that we become so much like Jesus that we begin to be persecuted more and more like Jesus. And so we've looked at, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Blessed are those who mourn. We talked about mourning, about sin and how it separates us from God, and so we seek out the forgiveness of God. He says, "They shall be comforted." And then the last one we talked about was, "Blessed are the meek," and we recognize that meekness is not weakness; it's the restraint of power, but it doesn't mean you don't have any power. And blessed are the meek. Those are the ones who are willing to say yes to God's will and to set their own will aside. So willing to call Jesus Lord. And so they will inherit the land, the meek, those who are willing to allow God's will. And so it kind of looks back on Israel. The first generation out of Egypt wouldn't go in the land. They wouldn't give up their own way of thinking. They wouldn't stop being Lord of their own lives and allow God to be their king and their Lord. So they didn't go into the land. But the next generation, still facing the same walled cities and giants, but by faith, they trusted God. They gave up their own will. They let God be in charge, and they were able to participate in the promised land. They were able to go in. And so this is the messaging for us through the first three. The fourth beatitude, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness' sake, for they shall be filled." So here is where the Beatitudes, I think, go from a relationship being developed with God. So the first three are sort of this way, much like the Ten Commandments. Worship the Lord your God. Don't have any other gods before Him. Don't make any graven images. These are the commandments that have to do with God and a person. But at some point, the commandments start going this way and that way. In number 4, keep the Sabbath. And that is a way of honoring God by resting on the Sabbath to recognize God's work in the 6 days of creation. He rested on the seventh, but also to honor Him, not just in this relationship, but in this relationship, because in that command is also a commandment to give your servants a break, to allow your servants to rest and also have a day. And so in honor of God, you're behaving like God toward them. God invites Israel to take on God's characteristics towards others in that command. So the fourth command goes this way and that way. Well, I see it similarly with the fourth beatitude, because if we're hungering and thirsting for righteousness, initially we need righteousness. In order to stand before God, we have to be right with God. And so the way to be right with God, well, the only way is Jesus. Paul makes a very compelling argument in chapter 4 of Romans that we can't work for it, we can't be good enough, we can't do enough. He says, to the man who works, his wages are not a gift, but they're what's due. But to the one who doesn't work, but trusts God, who justifies the ungodly, his faith is credited as righteousness. And so in chapter 5, it begins in verse 1, he says, therefore, so this is a summation of what he just covered in chapter 4, having been justified by faith, as opposed to our own works to do it, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God. You can't have peace with God if you're trying to be justified by your own efforts. Human performance will never give anybody peace with God. I know it. I've been there. Some of you know you've been there. But when you accept the righteousness of Christ, when you say like Paul, I want to be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from law, but a righteousness that comes from God by faith, when you have that, then you can find peace. Peace, even though you're not perfect, but you're credited or counted as perfect. In our Wednesday Hebrews class, we were in chapter 10, where he makes the case that by that one sacrifice of Jesus, we've all been made perfect. Though he has made perfect once and for all, forever, those who are being made holy. I'm somebody who's in the process of being made holy. I'm not holy if you evaluate me, but I am holy because God calls me holy. And so there's a righteousness. I want to be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own, but that which comes by faith. There's a righteousness we have. And so he said, hunger and thirst for that righteousness. I want that. Okay, so that's first and foremost the relationship between me and God. I have that righteousness. But then, once we experience the righteousness of God and we're made right with God, then we begin to join God in his pursuit for righteousness with others, for things to be right, to make things right. And that's the same as justice. The Greek word dikaios it comes into English dikaios has a lot of forms that come into English as things like being right or being just or justice, righteousness, to justify. All of these words are basically built off this idea of being right, the stem, dikaios. And so we're seeking for things to be right. We want to be right with God, and then we also want to bring that into relationships so we are right with one another, and we want what's right for others. That's wanting justice. And there's been a lot of call for that in our country lately, and rightly so. In a lot of ways, there have been things that haven't been right. And so when we see like racial prejudice, and we know that's wrong, we want what's right for those who are being harmed by this. And Christians should be passionate about that, to want what's right there. But here's the kicker here. There's another side to that, because we have to also want what's right for others. When we see police officers falsely being attacked, and who haven't done anything wrong, who haven't been racially prejudiced, their families suffering because they've been attacked or even killed. We need to want what's right for them as well. This is the thing about justice. You don't get to just choose where you want it. When you want what's right for others, you need to want what's right for all others. I had some conflict in some church members one time, and my family, we were more hanging around friends with a couple of the families, and one of the families, not really so much, but there was a conflict, and as I understood the conflict, I realized there was, like always, were usually problems on both sides and some misunderstandings, and people need to just own their stuff and forgive them and maybe apologize and be done with it. But in trying to communicate to the ones that I was closer to in terms of hanging out, that there were some issues, that grievances on the other side as well. They got mad at me, and as far as I remember it, I was told, well, you should have been on our side. And I didn't want to be on anybody's side. I wanted everyone to have what's right. And I said, well, what do you mean? Well, because you are our friend. You should be on our side because you're our friend. Yeah, I mean, that may work that way with friends, but it doesn't work that way with friends in Christ. In Christ, we need justice. So even if the other person's not a friend, they might even be an enemy, but we still have to want what's right. We can't give up what's right just because it serves our needs. Just one other example of that. Sometimes Supreme Court justices, and I don't know the stats on which side of the aisle people do this more or less, but sometimes Supreme Court justices don't vote with the party that put them appointed them to the Supreme Court. And a lot of people get mad about that. But I don't get mad about that. I mean, even if I disagree with whatever the issue is, I don't get mad about it. In fact, I love seeing integrity. I love it. There's just not enough of it. And so if somebody that's trusted enough and has a resume enough and been vetted enough to make it to the Supreme Court to be appointed, that's a person that we have to trust is looking to do what's right as far as they can see it. And so when somebody judges a case and crosses over the aisle on some of these things, I don't think we should get mad. Even if we're disagreeing about the issue, we need to celebrate the integrity of people who are willing to vote their conscience and willing to vote on what they believe is right, that they are doing right. And we shouldn't just want people that vote the party line. We shouldn't want that, because then it's just whoever happens to be in power that set of years. That's the way the court goes. It's not supposed to be like that. And so blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they should be filled not only with righteousness from God, but filled with a life of seeking righteousness for others and wanting to see what's right come about in everyone's life. And so I hope you're blessed in that way. I hope you're hungering and thirsting for righteousness. If you don't know the righteousness of God, if you haven't been forgiven, if you're walking around with a burden of sin, you can be filled. You can be comforted for sin. You can inherit the land, and you can be filled with the righteousness of God, and you can become a source of change and bringing righteousness as well. If you'd like to know more about that, and you can always contact us at Randy Elliott at sunnyhillschurchofchrist.org, shcoc.org works. And God bless you today. Bye-bye.